So, welcome everybody. I am very excited to be here with you tonight to talk to you about this amazing new company that was started by Brian Wallach and Sandra Ibravaya. You know them from I Am ALS, but this is their new gig that they have started. And I love the reason they started this company. They started it because they found it took them, with all of their connections in the community, and Sandra's mom and dad both having scientific backgrounds, it took them a long time to get the kind of services that they needed for Brian. And they recognized with their expertise, if it took them that long to get those access to services, that there were probably a lot of people in the ALS community who weren't getting what they needed. And so they searched and worked and tried to get those services brought to people in a couple years. And they finally realized, let's just do it ourselves, right? And so this is an amazing healthcare company where they've brought their passion to help the ALS community out to help all of you. And so I'm really excited to be the host. I'm going to be kind of in the background tonight, but I'm going to introduce you to everybody that'll be talking tonight. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mike Henson for about 5 minutes. And then we will go to the other members. So if you see our screen in the top right, we have Brian Wallach and Evie up there, who is going to be Brian's voice today. Below Brian on the screen is his gorgeous wife, Sandra, who is on the mend. So we're so glad that you are with us today. And then Mike Henson, who was the founder of No More Excuses, a Facebook group. On the top left, we have Brooke Croak, who is Synapticure's one and only amazing genetic counselor, who is going to be the person you talk to if you get genetic counseling done with Synapticure. And then in the bottom left, I am so excited to introduce Dr. Eric Anderson. He is the teleneurologist. He is the VP of clinical operations at Synapticure and oversees the other teleneurologists who are going to be able to help you. And I think we're at 40 states right now, and hopefully the other 10 will come soon behind. So my name is Michelle Lorenz. I should have introduced myself at the beginning. I apologize. My name is Michelle Lorenz, and I am one of the co-founders of another nonprofit called Voices for ALS. And I'm so excited to be here. I'll help moderate the call, but most of the time I'm going to be quiet tonight. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, so that you can tell your story about your genetic testing and how you've been using Synapticure.
Well, thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it. And, genetic counseling is something that is really becoming a necessity for ALS. As I was just telling Dr. Anderson and the rest of you before we went live, I was diagnosed in March of 2018. I had no family history of ALS. And like many of you probably don't either, or at least for now, you may think that you don't. You may be shocked to learn that you actually do. And I certainly was. It was a huge shock because I had lost my grandparents on my mom's side and then my mother early in life, sometime a little bit after age 50. So not, they weren't, that's pretty young, but not, they weren't old by any means. And it was a total shock to learn that that's probably where it came from because there was no, they didn't have a chance to get into their mid 50s and up into their 60s. So the point being here with all this is that for years, most ALS doctors just didn't ask because there was really no reason to ask or to find out whether or not you were carrying one of the most common ALS genes, such as SOD1 or C9, so on and so forth. But with some of the tremendous progress recently made by companies like Biogen with some of these small molecule drugs and ASOs, there's a lot in the pipeline now. And when I received genetic testing, I was absolutely stunned. I received my test as part of a free service that was done as part of the Neuron phase 3 trial. So the thing is I would recommend to all patients upon diagnosis that you do get checked for genetic counsel or for a genetic form of ALS or familial ALS as it's called. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. A lot of is people think it's expensive, and I think Dr. Anderson could probably correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it used to be quite expensive, somewhere in the thousands of dollar ranges. And that is not the case. This amazing new company that Michelle and I were incredibly lucky to be invited to be a part of the patient advisory board early on. And when this thing started to kind of gather momentum behind the scenes, it was hard to kind of keep it a secret because I guess it's something that ALS has needed for so long. And we're going to find out why, I think, in a large part tonight with this discussion. But when Brian and Sandra did this, it filled a very much needed void in ALS, and that void is not only just having your own patient counselor, and I'm sure Brooke is going to be speaking with with everybody about that tonight. But the bottom line is that you should get genetically tested. Synapticure is going to offer you a way to do that. It's not difficult, and sure Dr. Anderson will explain that. I think it's actually just a saliva test, I think, right? And I'll get into that. You send off your your saliva and you get your product back, your results back. And if that's incorrect, of course, we'll discuss that. But the bottom line is that many of you may not know that you're carrying SOD1 or C9 and some of the other variants, FUS and so on and so forth. And I have a very slow progressing version of SOD1. And so some of the other folks out there watching this may also have slow progressing, or unfortunately, fast progressing varieties. As we know, some of them are very aggressive, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, we're going to take your questions about this. So the bottom line is that this company is exciting. It's going to fill a much needed hole in the ALS community. The telehealth is going to just blow the roof off of this disease, I'm convinced. It's hard enough to get out and do things, as you all know, going to these doctor's appointments and going to clinic, and we'll figure out how tonight that fits in. Synapticure fits into that space. And so I guess with that said, Michelle, if that's a good starter, let's get into this and let's figure out what people can do to get tested and what it means, more importantly, if you are genetic ALS. So
absolutely. And I'll just annotate to Mike's story is that he was at one of the top ALS clinics in the world. And so don't assume just because you're at the best clinic that you're going to be offered all of the things. So I am excited to turn this over to Sandra and to Brian and Evie, so that they can share a little bit about their vision for Synapticure. And then we'll go and speak to Dr. Anderson and close up with Brooke. And then we'll save probably about 20 to 30 minutes at the end of this so that you guys can ask your questions. So as we're talking tonight, if questions come up, type them in the comment box. And if you're just jumping on with us, make sure you type the state that you're in. So we want Eric and Brooke to know what states where they have a lot of their patients that'll be coming from. So Sandra, turning it over to you and Brian.
Wonderful. Brian, do you want to kick it off and then I'll follow you?
Well, I'll begin with a confession. I remember when we were talking with my brother Peter about building Synapticure. And I said two things. Number one, I am terrified. Number two, we have to do this. And the reason why is that we have seen so many of our friends live with this disease. And we have seen the roadblocks that exist at every turn. And we have to use this moment to make things better and to build a better system. And Sandra and Pete pushed me to do it, which I'm grateful for. And Sandra now actually has the job of executing on the vision, as she is the CEO of the company. But I want to pause here and say thank you so much to Michelle and Mike for having us. And thank you everybody for joining us. The real rock stars of the call are Eric and Brooke, who have put together a presentation for you guys so that you can see just how busy we've been and how much more there is to do. So with that, Sandra?
Yeah, well, to Brian's point, I'm eager to turn it over to Eric and Brooke as well, so they can share more in depth. But just like Brian said, we've been in this ALS fight for 5 years. And like everybody on this call, it is an awful, awful road. And we just wanted to make it easier because we've learned a lot of things along the way. And we thought, wow, we have an obligation to create a better healthcare system for ALS patients. And we know exactly what needs to be done because as patients, no one experiences this disease in the same way as patients and caregivers do. And so frankly, no one knows how to fix it like everyone on this call and Brian and I. And we felt that we had a responsibility to do everything we could to make this road better for everybody in any way that we could. So just wanted to acknowledge that everybody on this call is going through a very hard road, and everything that we are focused on is how do we make this path easier, and how do we give everybody the best chance at fighting this for as long as possible, which is what we want for Brian and what we want for everybody fighting this disease. So, to Brian's point, we have built an incredible team. We have built a team that can help patients and caregivers in a number of ways. One is everything about ALS care is speed. The faster you get genetic testing results, the faster you get genetic counseling, the faster you get clinical trial decision-making support, the faster you get an explanation of the best fit supplements for you, of off-label therapies, and potentially in the future of expanded access program options. Everything is about speed in ALS because the disease moves fast. So Synapticure is moving faster, and we're making sure that everything we do meets your need when you have it. As we all know, it is incredibly difficult. Brian is wheelchair bound to travel. Everyone on this call can relate to that. So how do we augment your in-person ALS clinic support with on-demand visits from the teleneurologist that Eric has brought together with decades in telemedicine and neurology leadership, and augment that with care coordination, with genetic testing and counseling, helping you navigate insurance, helping you navigate truly any question you have in real time, because the current system doesn't work around patients and it needs to. And so that's what we built. And we have basically the leaders in precision medicine that have driven forward the field in oncology backing Synapticure. And so we really have the best team, the best assets, the best support to make this a very, very important way to support ALS families. So obviously, Brian and I feel very deeply about this. This is all coming from our passion for wanting to give everybody every open door that we have fought to open for ourselves to everybody else. And so with that, Eric, let me turn it to you to share more.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for that intro, and thank you for having us, for sure. I'm very excited to be part of this. The entire reason that I built my career around telemedicine was the idea of democratizing care. And so this company is very special to me. I'm very happy and excited to be part of this as well. So I'm going to share some slides that are basically going to outline what we can do, but I do need someone to give me permission to share the slides. Okay, I can do it. Thank you. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay. So I'm going to go over a couple things. I think what everyone is really asking is, what can Synapticure and CareND do for me? Like, how can we do what everyone else has just been talking about? How can we make your lives easier? How can we, help you on your journey? And so the first thing that I'm going to go over is this slide, which looks a little complex. But abstractly speaking, it's just really looking at these triangles here, which represent the status quo or the way things currently are. And right now, as many of you have experienced, the journey is long and there's a lot of barriers in the way. There's a lot of silos, not sharing information, difficult to get appointments, things like that. So there's barriers to access, and there's barriers to not just access, but continuity of care and reaching the appropriate people who can help you on your journey. It's the same thing with, the specialists. We have limited access to genetic testing. Even some of the most prominent ALS centers don't offer the extent of genetic testing that maybe could be offered or should be offered. Same thing with clinical trials. Clinical trials are typically regional or site specific. And I know a lot of patients may be willing to travel, but they just don't have access to the information that lets them know that there may be a trial that's available for them somewhere else. Additionally, it's difficult, the cadence that people currently see their ALS caregivers. For some people, they can only see them, twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. And it's not always the case that you're able to make those appointments due to things that happened in your life or mobility issues or caregiver support. And so telemedicine really does provide an answer to that. So we are, in doing that, providing increased access for ALS patients and putting the entire umbrella of care under Synapticure. So we're taking these old status quos and we're taking that on, and we basically take on care navigation and the management of care from that point onward. And so to look at this further, to roughly think about what is Synapticure and CareND. So Synapticure is the organization that we're talking about. CareND is specifically the clinical arm of Synapticure. And from that, we have the full clinical team, which are our care coordinators, which are mostly nurses or licensed clinical social workers. We have Brooke as our genetic counselor, and we have assembled a group of teleneurologists to see patients as well. We offer genetic and molecular testing, which is something that Brooke will talk about when she gives her presentation. And also, we provide personalized care. We kind of pride ourselves on trying to bring in precision medicine and personalized medicine, because as Sandra had mentioned earlier, everyone's care journey is different, and not everybody has the same presentation of ALS. People need different things at different times. And so we are working towards making this a very personal experience as well. We also have partnerships with a lot of the leading or top ALS academic medical centers, for which who we would work with closely on sending referrals or providing services that otherwise are not offered. So right now, the number of people that we have enrolled in our program is already on par with the largest ALS care providers in the country. So we have 584 patients signed up. Many of our patients have never seen ALS specialists or had access to clinical trials, but are still eligible to enroll. So this is the point that was brought up earlier, that it's important to get tested. So if there are clinical trials that select for specific genotypes or genetic mutations or variants, then those are things where we could potentially provide an ability to match you to those trials. Of our patients that we see, 24% had never seen an ALS specialist, 43% have never had any access to therapeutic trials, and 50% reach out to us when they are eligible to access these trials. This is a slide that I want to spend a little bit of time on, which is going to basically map out what the experience would be when you register with Synapticure. So we take patients from any type of relationship or like pre-existing relationship. If you're seeing an ALS center that you like, that's perfectly fine. If you're seeing a local neurologist that you like, that's perfectly fine. If you're seeing people that you don't like, that's fine too. If you register for Synapticure, your first visit is with the care coordinators. Okay. And from there, what they do is they will take a detailed history of you. They will understand your story. We will try to get your medical records with your permission. We will assemble those all for you in one place so that that's available. We use that for referrals if you want to be referred somewhere else. If you have an established relationship with an existing provider or an existing ALS Center of Excellence, we can co-manage with them. If there's someone that you want to continue care with, that's perfectly fine. And in those cases, we work closely with them to make sure that they're managing your care as best as possible. And if, you have other issues that arise in between your scheduled visits with them that you need to see someone, we can see you pretty quickly. If you have genetic testing or want genetic testing or don't know if your genetic testing is as comprehensive as you want it to be, we can set you up with Brooke, and she will go ahead and she can advise you on other testing that may be available to you. If there's new types of testing or other panels that can be done, as this is something that is changing with some frequency, she can advise you on that, and she advises our physicians as well. So when you see a CareND physician, one of our teleneurologists specifically for ALS care, we provide many services. Again, if you're seeing someone locally, we manage that relationship with that ALS center that you're seeing or that physician that you're seeing. We can provide referrals locally to to physical therapy, occupational therapy, palm, psych, et cetera, things that you need locally. We can provide referrals for that. We can provide symptomatic management. So we can write prescriptions for things that may help your condition, whether or not that's, excess salivation or other things. We can also provide education and detailed conversations regarding nutraceuticals, off-label medications, as well as potentially EAPs, which should be, we're working on making that a process as well. And then again, we can also order genetic testing so that we can get those test results. And if they're actionable, we can do something about that. In the future, which is hopefully the near future, we're working on also providing an RPM suite, which is remote patient monitoring. And so what that means is that we would send to your home certain devices that you would use on a regular basis where we can monitor certain things. So for example, we want these devices to be things that would be actionable. So if you were to use it, we could do something that would prolong your ability to continue on as you are, as opposed to declining. We want to prevent those types of things. So one of the devices that we've determined would be extremely useful and would be actionable would be an FVC monitor. So basically an FVC device so that you would be able to look at measure your pulmonary function, and we would be able to see that. So when you did that at home, we would be able to monitor that. That data would come into us and we would be able to track that over time. So what that means is that if your pulmonary function test started to decline, or your measure of pulmonary function declined, then we could potentially intervene and introduce other things like non-invasive ventilation support or things like that to prolong the time between then and potentially going on to mechanical ventilation. Other examples are regularly tracking your weight. So if you were to get on a scale and we were to weigh you, it definitely means something different if you had a slight decline over time in your weight as opposed to a more rapid decline or steeper decline. Certainly your nutrition and your ability to maintain your strength is extremely important, especially when you're battling something like ALS. And so those would be things we would be able to identify on a rapid and continuous basis, and we would be able to provide interventions to try to help you and prolong your activities. right now, we have teleneurologist coverage in all of these states, 40 out of 50 states. We are missing the 10 up here, but we already have put in a plan and hope to, as well as Alaska and Hawaii. But we have a plan in place and are hoping to cover the rest of these states before the end of the year. So we hope to have 50 states covered relatively quickly. We're at the mercy, of course, of the medical boards, but once we get that in place, we will be able to cover all 50 states. But chances are, just statistically speaking, 40 out of 50 states is pretty good, and so most likely we do have coverage for you. This is just some other information that informs the way that we move forward. So as you know, this is a very patient-centric approach. And so we listen very carefully to what patients with ALS tell us, and we pivot and move forward based on the information that we get from them. So from some of our surveys of our patients, what we understand is that everybody wants home care support. Right. These are things that are identified to us. So we know that these are things that are important to our patients. These are things that we want to provide as well. Approximately 80% also want insurance navigation, financial guidelines, which we do offer now. We have insurance specialists who can help talk you through, what insurance covers, what it won't, help you navigate those types of things. In addition, there's legal support that's requested about 40% of the time, certainly on our roadmap. Every patient wants clinical trials and prognostic tools, biomarkers, which is what we're offering. For psych services, people are requesting grief counseling for family and patients on a recurring basis. It's requested by approximately 80% of patients. For physical therapy, occupational therapy, it's requested by about 45% of patients. Speech is requested by about 55% of patients. Nutrition, again, 55% of patients. And for our remote patient monitoring services. Again, we're exploring this sending devices to patients' homes, and we hope to eliminate the need for about 50% of ongoing clinical visits if we were able to do that, because we'd be able to monitor that pulmonary function at home. And so those are the types of things that we are looking forward to bringing you. Right now, we're showing you on this slide what we're offering today and what is going to be occurring on our roadmap. So the dark blue is what we have in place today, and the light blue are things that are in process, and the gray is on our future roadmap. So right now, again, starting at the beginning of the blue triangle here, you're onboarded with a care coordinator who provides ongoing care and training. Okay, and they also help facilitate local resources for you. We provide genetic testing and counseling. We provide our teleneurology services. We provide access to our academic medical center partners. On our roadmap, we have psych services, occupational therapy, nutrition, speech, remote patient monitoring, physical therapy. Some of these things our clinical team is also able to do. So, for example, some of our physicians are trained with nutrition and are able to provide that type of advice to patients now, but we don't have specifically a nutritionist yet, but that is, again, on the roadmap. We also provide you with care coordination and guidance. That's something that the care coordinators continue to do. We are also providing insurance navigation, financial guidance. That's something we do now. And we also are providing early intervention and localized care navigation. So the care coordinators are able to find local resources in your area. And if we identify during a clinic visit that there's something that could be intervened upon, even in between your existing ALS clinic visits or otherwise, we can provide intervention in the form of either referrals to services that are required, like if it's something pulmonary, or we can prescribe medications that may help as well. And again, moving on down the roadmap, we will be offering home health support, potentially legal support, and then other diagnostics and research studies to help the community. Ultimately, after all of that, and at the end of the day, we have one goal, which is to help you with your ALS journey or odyssey and struggle. And we're doing this by reimagining the care and treatment systems so that they're built around you specifically, we emphasize the personalized element of this and what you're living through. And from here, I'd like to go ahead and pass that off to Brooke now. Unless we want to break for questions now, but I presume that we probably want to get to Brooke first and then move on. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. We've got a lot of good ones. So, and Brooke's killing it on the questions, by the way. She's answering them about as fast as people are asking them. So nice.
Oh, great.
But we will
Doing my
also be
best.
able to go back and make sure all of them get answered over time. So, but anyway, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brooke.
Thanks so much, Dr. Anderson. I'm happy to just briefly go over some of the genetics of ALS and how we work at Synapticure, how we can help you proceed with testing or discuss your testing that you've had previously. If you don't mind, Michelle, letting me share, I think it's working now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So again, my name is Brooke and I live in Central Illinois. I've been living here for about 15 years. I was working in a local clinic and I have some prior experience working with patients who have a diagnosis of ALS, but I've also got some experience in the pediatric world, working with newborn screenings, with some neurodegenerative disorders as well, like SMA, and then the leukodystrophies. So I'm very excited to be at Synapticure. Like many of us, also have a personal connection and feel very strongly about helping families get through this journey, especially with genetic testing. So I will just start by briefly going over some of the history. Now, I'm happy to send these slides to anyone that would like them. Some of you probably have this memorized and others, it may be new to you, but I think the most important things to remember here is that ALS and neurodegenerative disorders have been talked about for a very long time. Some of the first documented cases were discussed in the 1850s. And really the first genetic information that we knew about ALS was in 1993. So, looking at how long this disorder has been known and studies have been published on it, we are fairly new in the genetics world in terms of ALS. So if we look at SOD1, being the first gene associated with ALS to be discovered, over time, over the last 10 or 20 years, there have been many other genes. I highlighted in 2011 that C9 was discovered, which is one of the more common causes of familial or genetic ALS. And then I highlighted on a similar track, a disorder called spinal muscular atrophy, which is also discovered. The gene was discovered around the same time as the first gene with ALS. But you can note at the bottom that in 2016 to 2019, that is when the FDA started approving therapies for SMA, which I think is very important because it can kind of show you that we're along the same track record and timing of really figuring out what the genetic cause is for some ALS and how that can be used to improve the understanding of the pathways that will affect people with any type of ALS, not necessarily just one specific genetic ALS. So I think while we know that someone mentioned and had a question about what percentage of this is, people with ALS, while maybe only a small subset are known to have a genetic change, all of these studies are really helping all individuals with ALS because we're learning more about the pathways and what causes the symptoms of these disorders. So if we specifically focus instead of in the last 150 years, just really looking in the last 5 to 10 years with ALS, we can note that because of the gene discoveries, once genes are discovered and we have a target, mouse models are created, then they look at maybe human stem cells, and then they're able to start actually beginning trials in real humans that have disease. So it's very amazing that we're at this point finally, and this is why I would say you've heard more about genetic testing as of late, is that there is some relevance to what you can do if, depending on results, trials are available for specific subtypes of ALS. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the panels and why we test for these things, but I think it's important to understand the history and what point we're at right now and why that genetic testing can be helpful. There's some other gene therapies out there as well. I'm not really here to talk about therapies, but that is something that, at Synapticure, if you see our neurologists or work with me, we are helping, guide people to academic medical centers or trial centers if that is something that you guys are eligible for. So just note overall that in terms of genetics, basically we recommend that anyone with ALS should be offered genetic testing. Do you have to pursue it? No, but would we recommend it? And should you be offered it? Absolutely. We would say that also if you have a family history of ALS, maybe you have a grandmother or an uncle or a sibling or something like that, you would also be eligible for some of the testing I'm going to talk about. The idea here again is to link people to specific trials and also increase knowledge about ALS for the ALS community to benefit treatment for all. So family members of individuals with ALS, again, can also be tested. We don't have to know the genetic cause in your family. You are eligible for testing. For instance, if you had a parent pass away and they are no longer available for testing, we can, it's ideal to test the person in the family who has the diagnosis, but that's not always possible. So just make sure that you know that you are eligible as well with that family history. Studies are showing that, in individuals who have a family history, there's a much higher chance that you are going to test and show a positive result on these types of tests. Even if you have zero family history, like Mike mentioned, we do oftentimes see that up to 10% of individuals who have ALS are going to have a positive genetic change on these tests. So again, anyone with ALS or anyone with a family history would be eligible. I'm going to briefly go over what the process is for testing. This may vary depending on the clinician you see, but I would say, I've talked to several genetic counselors at academic medical centers who are in this area. And this is what I would say the most general pathway for what's happening right now with ALS patients. First, because testing is available through what's called sponsored testing, that means there's a research group that's available and trying to get more information on the genetics of a condition. They are willing to pay for your genetic testing because they are going to learn more about that and targets, and that will benefit, what future clinical trials they might pursue, things like that. So those sponsored panels, there is a consent to it because you are agreeing that you're sharing your data and information, with potentially whoever's sponsoring the panel. But the benefit is you are not being billed for insurance or paying self-pay for these types of tests. So what I would say right now is at a minimum, people are being offered a panel that looks at the genes that are known to be associated with an increased risk for ALS. In the middle here, next to that first arrow, those are some of the common genes that are on panels. There's lots of different labs that offer testing. There's a few that have the sponsored testing. Every panel is slightly different. I would say they're averaging around 30 genes, but it is important to know that maybe someone tested 5 years ago might have only been screened for a few genes, whereas now the gene number is going to increase. And even depending on what lab you've had testing in, it really does vary as to what specific genes are looked at. So that is sort of the first step that I would recommend considering. And the next step would be that if you get a result, obviously from this testing panel that is positive, that would help us determine what you may be eligible for in terms of trials. We could help set up family testing if that's something that's desired. Having a positive genetic result can give you a little bit of a better idea maybe of what progression potentially is like for other families who have a similar genetic variant. So it can give some details beyond just what treatments you might be eligible for. For families who do not test positive on this first panel, I would say just know that it doesn't necessarily stop there. Some families choose to stop there and maybe reassess in a few years. Other families might decide that they really want the full information. So we could look at genes that are not currently associated with ALS, but maybe are associated with other neurodegenerative disorders, depending on the indication, maybe your EMG and CV results. That can play a role in giving us information on which route to go next. But really, I think commonly now we're offering whole genome where we're looking at all of the genes and the lab will report back things that are associated with your clinical history. So it wouldn't be looking at just a subset of ALS genes, but beyond that. Mitochondrial disorders sometimes have symptoms that mimic ALS. There are also other, what we don't think of as ALS genes that can have symptoms that mimic ALS. So it's important to just know that the ALS panel is not the stopping point necessarily. There are some families who are not sure about testing or timing wise, it's stressful to try to figure out what testing they want. And they really just want to make sure that they have the option to do testing in the future. DNA banking is a great thing for families in this situation. It's very inexpensive. You can actually order it yourself. It does not require physician or even genetic counselor order. There is a self-pay price for storage, basically. It averages around $100 to $200. but that's a great option for families who think they may want genetic testing, but are undecided or in a situation where it's just not the right time for testing. So that's something we're also happy to share information with families about. The one thing I will speak to is that panels are looking at a smaller number of genes, so they are usually pretty quick to get results back, 3 to 4 weeks. When we start looking at all of the genetic information, we know that that can take a lot more time for analysis, and so we're looking at more of a 3 to 4 month turnaround time. So that can also play a role in why someone might choose a panel first and then go on to more comprehensive screening. In terms of DNA banking, that would be something that you could just order at any time, send back, and they would store it, and you would be able to use it for testing in the future. We've talked a lot about genes and panels, and of that panel of about 30-ish genes, there are several genes that are more commonly identified in patients with ALS. So, I mentioned the C9 gene. It was discovered in 2011. And this is the very most common cause of genetic ALS at this time in European Caucasians. It's not as common in other populations, so it's something to know that, really some of the expected results will vary based on your background. SOD1 is a little bit more common in certain populations, still pretty prevalent in the Caucasian European population at about 15%. And then, there's a couple of other genes listed here, but those make up kind of the remaining percentage of genetic ALS. So I would highlight that these are the most common, and therefore that is why they are also most often targeted in trials, because we're going to see more patients with this specific gene type. That makes more patients eligible to be in a trial. It's a little more difficult sometimes with a more rare variant to find patients of similar genetic cause to also include in the same trial. Okay, I'm going to briefly talk about the process for genetic counseling. This is a picture I took during COVID when I was sent home from my clinic that I thought I was going to be working in person for a while. So luckily, genetics is very amenable to remote counseling, remote testing, because you really just need to speak with someone. They can electronically share results with me, and then I can order testing online, and they get a kit at their home and are able to do a saliva swab and send it back on their own. So fortunately, COVID, I think, has been actually very good for telehealth. And what we usually do on the calls when we discuss genetics with patients is, make sure to review any prior testing, take a look at the family health history. So not just a generic question like, oh, do you have ALS in the family, but what are your extended relatives' causes of death? Did they die at a young age, or is it an age where we would have seen maybe some type of a, neurodegenerative disorder actually be able to play a role in their health? Obviously, all of those things will play a role into whether we think you're more likely to test positive or not. But again, even in the absence of family history, we can find genetic changes. After assessing the family history and all the prior records and clinical records, usually we discuss briefly what recommendation I would have for genetic testing and the options. And at that point, a patient can consent to proceed with testing. We would mail the kits, which are kind of pictured here, come to your home within a week, get sent back, and again, get results. So that is my brief overview. I'm sure people will have more specific questions, but I am happy to answer any questions as well if anyone wants to email me or call or text, and we can get you to the right setup. I know Eric talked a lot, or Dr. Anderson talked a lot about the pathway to get into speaking with a care coordinator. That's a great resource to start with. That is no cost involved to get established with Snaptocure and get more information on the resources that we do have in terms of genetic counseling and neurology. So thank you so much for letting me share this information with you. And I think we're happy to answer some questions.
Amazing. How about a speed round of questions here? I got 3 that seem to be pretty common. Does that sound good? Do the lightning round. We need, oh man, Alex Trebek. I wish he were still here. All right. So, I guess one of the most common questions was, first of all, starting right at the beginning, is a formal, proper diagnosis required for a test? I imagine it probably is, but that's.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say currently Synapticure, we are primarily working with patients who have a clinical diagnosis of ALS.
Okay.
Um,
All right. Makes
so
sense, really. Yeah, go ahead.
that,
Sorry.
yeah, that would be the answer for patients that we are currently seeing and enrolling. Is there genetic testing for other indications? Of course. Are we going to move into that in the future? Potentially. But yes, for us to see and work with families, we do require a diagnosis of ALS at this time.
And
Okay.
then let me just jump in, Mike, as a follow-up to that,
Sure.
because I know Sandra
Go
and I
ahead.
have talked about this privately as well. So sometimes people are having difficulty getting diagnosed because they're at a local clinic without expertise. And I know I've sent several people to your team. Can you talk about how your care coordinators and now Dr. Anderson's team is going to be able to help people get a proper diagnosis?
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to take that, Sandra? Or do you want me to take it? Okay. Yeah. So as everyone is aware, the struggle of ALS, as well as the struggle of getting the correct diagnosis, is difficult and long and arduous. And it is very difficult. It's something that, can take a long time and requires specific resources to make sure that it's not something else, right? So that is something that, is an area that we would hope to move into in the future, as far as, providing more resources towards that. In the meantime, we can provide referrals to places that can, help facilitate that diagnosis, right? So there are confirmatory tests that cannot be done over telemedicine currently, which is a technical limitation, but getting you to places locally where you can get those types of tests done can help with that. Once someone has a formal diagnosis, then the door is open within Synapticure as far as helping with that journey. The difficulty with that is that what we don't, we want to help everyone that we can possibly help, right? But we are very focused on ALS and the ALS community. And, it's not unlikely. And certainly we've had cases where people come in with other things that are more of a myositis or a myopathy or something that is not ALS, for which, we kind of have limitations on what we can do. And we definitely want to make sure that the limited resources that we have available to us, we are focusing on the ALS community specifically.
Okay. Next would be, what is the approximate lead time right now? Let's say somebody gets in contact with you, works with Brooke, and from first contact until genetic results. I know it's going to vary, obviously, but approximate time, Brooke, how's that running right now?
Sure. So I'd answered someone else usually about a week or so to get in to see a genetic counselor. The longer wait time would be getting the kit sent to your home and then receiving results back because of the analysis. So I would say on average, patients should expect anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, just with the scheduling, the box getting sent to your home, you sending it back, and then analysis.
Yeah, and just to build on the questions and answers, both about getting a diagnosis and the speed of genetic testing and results. Speaking from what Brian and I experienced, a couple things I want to elevate for everybody. One of them is when Brian and I were facing a possible diagnosis, we knew a couple people who knew and had kind of a foot in the door at some of the top ALS clinics. And so that's the current unfair system today, right?
Yeah.
That if you know somebody who knows somebody, you're going to get in fast. And that is part of what motivates Brian and I to do this work, is that should not be the way the system works. That is a broken system. And the way this system should work is anybody who wants to see a top ALS clinic should get in as fast as possible. And so to Dr. Anderson's point, that is something that Synapticure can do for you, is you don't need to know somebody, you just need to know Synapticure, and we will get you in. And that is a really important part of why we do what we do. So we have these partnerships with these top ALS clinics, and it's very important to us that you get seen quickly by the top people in person and get your diagnosis as fast as possible, because that speed matters, as everybody knows so well. And then building on what Brooke shared about genetic testing, Brian and I actually fought for 6 months to get testing because we didn't have family history, and the hoops we had to jump through to get that testing done, to get the results, to get the counseling. Again, we're talking about 6 months. So at Synapticure, we are here to fix that problem. You should get tested automatically, no matter what. No one should question why you're even asking for testing, because right now the American Academy of Neurology recommends that every single ALS patient get tested, because some of the most promising therapies emerging are targeting genetic variants that you may not know that you have, that you may not know run in your family, and your best shot at fighting this thing could be one of those therapies. Just like Mike Henson told us,
That's
he
right.
had no idea that he
Don't.
had this family history, and
That's right.
that is the path that will get him a targeted therapy that will give him the best chance. And so that is very, very important, is that we are going to get you that testing light years ahead of a traditional process.
And Sandra, let me jump in and just point out something for people. If you have a juvenile form of ALS, so if your daughter or son is diagnosed with ALS, there is one of the most common mutations, the FUS mutation, that is what's called de novo, which means the parents don't typically carry the gene. And so your child may not know, you may not know that your child has the FUS mutation because you think, oh, I don't have it. And yet there's a really promising trial going on right now that a mom fought for to get done, and it's in phase 3 right now. So just because you don't have a family history, you can still have what's called de novo, meaning your child's going to be the first one. Next question, Mike.
Well, somebody asked about being tested a couple of times. Like somebody felt they got a poor test, or perhaps this is not the result they wanted, maybe, or maybe an inaccurate test the first time. It's always good to seek that second opinion. Is that something they can do with you, Brooke, to try to use your vendor instead of perhaps one they've used, just to verify or validate the results?
Sure. I think that one thing I did not speak to tonight, but could take an entire night of conversation, is variants of uncertain significance, where we find a change in a gene, but we don't fully understand whether it is clinically playing a role in your health. It's possible that patients can have those types of results that, aren't necessarily looked closely at, because we really don't, at the time that the testing is done, understand the meaning. But the hope is in the future, we learn more information about it. And so it is good to, if you have a variant, take a look again at those results, have someone in genetics or your neurologist take a look maybe after 1 to 2 years. That would be a general recommendation for anyone, not necessarily related to which laboratory you had testing in, but just whether there's any new information available about the genes, because we're always discovering things. And then beyond that, there may be genes that were never tested 3 years ago that are now on the panel. So that's another reason.
Well, yeah.
Brian wanted to make a quick point.
Oh, Brian.
Say it again. I'll use myself as an example. So when we finally got genetic testing, I found out that I had a TBK1 variant. And at the time, it was a variant of unknown significance.
This is an amazing question.
And 1 year later, I had another test. And the variant had moved into non-pathogenic. And when I saw Brooke, she reminded me that it had been 3 years since my last genetic testing. So I just did my at-home test. And it was super easy. If I can do it, anyone can.
Yeah, I think one other. Oh,
Your
sorry.
ears must have been burning, Brian. Sorry, I'll just add this. Somebody literally just asked that question about TBK. So the specific question is there an ASO trial for TBK1 carrier? And doctor might be able to answer that question. Have you heard anything in the pipeline there, or anybody on the panel, frankly,
And
from Biogen for
yeah, Brian, I know
TBK1?
you wanted to say something about TBK1, but then I'll jump in.
So I know there is a trial right now. I'm sorry, there is no trial right now. But there are a few ASOs that are in the pipeline and that will turn into trials and that will move to trials in the next 3 years. Next few years, I'm sorry. Again, it's a reason to have your test. So that if the trial comes around, you can be the first person to enroll.
Yeah, and then
Perfect.
just Mike, speaking to that question about if someone has had prior genetic testing, should they get it again? Obviously, Brian shared his own experience of having been tested 3 years ago. Just very concretely, there was a Synapticure patient who received at the time what was the most extensive testing. Nothing came up of significance. When they came to Synapticure, they got tested again with the new updated list of genes. And they were identified as having a variant related to the ataxin-2 gene. They had not been tested for that before because that was not on the prior panel. Now, what's
Gotcha.
really important for everyone to know is that there is a Biogen trial that is targeting patients with that ataxin-2 issue. And the patient who came to Synapticure, who got their genetic testing redone, where Synapticure found that issue, is now enrolled in the Biogen trial targeting their issue.
Wow.
So you are literally, we want to stay on the cutting edge of your testing, of your personalized information, because there are new trials emerging every day. There are new targeted therapies emerging every day, and you deserve to be the first in line and the first made aware of these trials. It is too much of a burden on families, the way that my family, being research scientists by training, had to stay personally on top of every new variant, of every new trial. I mean, nobody else has 2 PhD research scientists' parents by, luck, right? Who travel to every international ALS conference. That is bananas. Synapticure is here to take that work off your plate. We are not affiliated with a specific ALS clinic, so we're not here to recommend any specific clinic's trial. We want you to pick a trial, to pick a therapy that makes sense for you. We have no stake in the game because we are only here for the patient. We are not beholden to any clinic or their research. We're here for you. And so get the testing with us if you can, and get the information you can. We want to do everything we can to give you the best chance to fight this for as long as possible.
And Sandra, I'll just
Amazing.
add a couple of things from the panel. You guys are testing for UNC13A or UNC13A, which is a hugely important gene. The 2 brand new papers that just came out on that. It's important because over in the UK, they found that there's an off-label therapy here in the United States you might be able to use that might work for you if you have that mutation. There's also some trials that are looking at it. So that gene's important. And I've been barraging Dr. Anderson with information about another gene they're testing, ERBB4, which is kind of new on the forefront as well. And I'm helping pepper him, keep his inbox busy, right, Dr. Anderson? With potentially, it's a variant of unknown significance that 2 of my friends have. But I've got Dr. Anderson on the trail to see if there's something we might be able to do. So there may be off-label therapies that what most people tell me when they go to a clinic is, oh, it's a variant of unknown significant or uncertain significance, and then they just ignore it. And that may not be the right approach, right? So let's see if there's something else that might help you along those routes. So next question, Mike.
Is there any time limit per se, let's say, for between diagnosis and what the services you offer are? I wouldn't think so, but there are some issues there with trials, we know, but is there any time limit for when somebody's first diagnosed and they come to you for genetic testing? Because after a point, is it, I guess, is it going to matter? I guess it's a difficult way to phrase that question, but it's the reality of it.
So there is no time limit. And the reason why is, I'm sorry, so one reason why is that for a patient who's far progressed, getting what? They might want to have genetic testing so that their family knows. Or so that they can see about a compassionate use program.
Right. Good point.
We don't want to influence. Oh, we don't want to exclude anyone
No.
who has a diagnosis. Even a patient like me should be able to have access to the very best care.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo that we are entering, because of what the ALS community accomplished, a new era of access to EAP, expanded access
That's right.
program, compassionate use drugs. So behind us should be the days of you don't qualify for a clinical trial, there's nothing available to you. That is history. This community made that phrase history. And so what Synapticare is poised and ready to do as soon as these EAP options come on the table is support patients to accessing them. And so it is critical to understand as much as you can about your specific subtype of ALS, so that whether it's a clinical trial or in the near future, an EAP option or compassionate use, we can help support you to get access to what makes sense for you.
Perfect answer. And that question was for you, Mike Savage, too, by the way. That's why I asked that question, because that's why you need to go and get the genetic testing done, because these EAP programs, you just never know. So yeah, go get it done. Call Synapticare, get set up with them, Mike, and that's why you need to know what you're dealing with.
And I have a couple questions that came into me that I'm going to throw out to the team. So I was speaking to somebody the other day, and they've been waiting for 10 months to get a cough assist machine. And they took 6 months to get their wheelchair. So is that something that a care coordinator can do? Because I've heard rave reviews, honestly. You know, the ALS community doesn't mince their words about somebody that does great and somebody that doesn't. And I've heard rave reviews about the care coordinators. So is that helping out expediting that DME for people? Is that something that Synapticare can do?
Yeah, so that is something that is a common problem, and a lot of it has to do with fighting with insurance and other things like that. So we think that with our insurance specialists, along with our care coordinators, that we should be able to expedite that process, because we are making that a priority. Where in a lot of clinic settings, a lot of that prior auth paperwork and other things sit, and it takes a lot longer. And as Sandra mentioned, speed is important to us. So we hope to nail down all of the little buzzwords and keywords we need to work with insurers to expedite all of those types of requests as soon as possible. That's a priority for us.
Another question that's come into me a lot is off-label therapies. So able to write prescriptions for sodium phenylbutyrate? Are you able to write prescriptions for ibutylast to get that imported from another country, or clenbuterol, perhaps from another country? So that's is that one of the roles that your team can serve, Dr. Anderson?
Yeah, so there are some rules around what we can prescribe over telemedicine, depending on the state and the location. Most of it is around like pain medications, opiates, benzos, that types of things like that. Those types of medications we are legally restrained from ordering. But other medications, as long as it's not one of those types of medications, we should be able to do. Yeah, and we are very progressive and open-minded about trying to match the patient's clinical regimen with their particular journey and disease.
Yeah.
And then
sorry, Michelle, just to add to that, I've seen a lot of patients comment on social media about how challenging it is to get a prescription, and that their doctor tells them, oh no, you have to go in person to clinic
Yep.
day, which might not be for 3 more months. So this is exactly where Synapticare can help.
Hell
You
yeah.
just reach out and you say, I
Yep.
need an on-demand, when I want it, telemedicine appointment, stat, we get
Perfect.
it for you. And then you have a discussion about what prescription you need. So that's very, very central to a way in which we can support.
Yeah,
So
that is
another-
so game changing.
Another question that's come in as of late because of the new oral version of Radicava. So especially for people that have Medicare, the original IV form of Radicava was under Medicare Part B, and now the oral version is Medicare Part D. So can you talk about how Synapticare can help somebody see if they qualify for the oral version, and how that process is going to work?
Yeah. So, we've been actually meeting with the company that has, made the oral Radicava, and we've gotten the lowdown on the, particular pharmacies where they had started rolling that out. We are more than happy. And I think for us, the most important thing was understanding from a clinical perspective, if someone's on an injectable form that lasts X amount of time, and then they're going to start an oral form, when do we start and stop one or the other? And I think that's just the most important thing for us in prescribing it, but, no issues prescribing it.
And your insurance navigator can help figuring out, that's the
that's-
important part that I think a lot of
that's the
people
other
are
part that
scared
I was
about.
gonna comment on. Yeah, so the insurance navigation, we can certainly take on as well. Mhm.
Yeah, and I would just say, Michelle, we have been hearing that our insurance navigation support has been very, very appreciated. And we have actually, as a result of that feedback from patients, decided to invest at Synapticare to ramp up that service. So just want to underscore that we completely appreciate how important that is. And we're going to be offering more of that because of the feedback we're hearing from patients about the need for insurance navigation support and how helpful what we've been able to do so far is. So yeah, absolutely.
Another question is, I got an email over the weekend about a person that had been hospitalized urgently, having problems breathing, couldn't get a hold of their own care team, and the hospital was completely unqualified to talk about ALS. They wanted to give this person oxygen, right? We know the complications with that. So is there a team at Synapticare that can get on the phone with a local hospital that may not have the expertise to help guide that patient through what could be a crisis situation?
So we have had multiple discussions about moving forward in that direction. We do not currently have that available as like a 24/7 type of service, but is something that we would like to move into.
How about offering genetic services, or do you take on currently PLS customers, or is it right now, is it limited only to ALS? Primary lateral sclerosis, yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
So right now we're only serving ALS patients.
Okay.
But our plan is to expand
Oh,
to PLS and beyond.
okay, great. I had that question. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to
Awesome.
underscore that, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can for the ALS community. And once we've got that nailed down, moving on. Yep.
Awesome, man. That's great. You got time for a few more? How are we doing on time, Michelle? I'm sure you were probably gonna.
This is
get to
Brian and
that.
Sandra's gig. So as long as they're good,
Okay.
we're good.
Well, I've got maybe a couple more, but if you've got one, go ahead. I'm sorting through them. I want to make sure I try to get them all in here. So if you've got one, feel free.
So actually, one of the things, Sandra, that you didn't mention on this, if they hadn't had a chance to watch the original presentation, is can you just tell them about some of the people that are on your scientific advisory board as well? Because they provide the foundational support, right, for what you guys are doing and how you're disrupting the healthcare space for ALS. So can you just kind of talk about some of those people real quick when Mike clicks the call?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have 2 advisory boards that are really driving the ship here. So one of them, let me first note, is the expert advisory board that is comprised primarily of patients and caregivers themselves, which we're extremely proud of. This is not an entity with some token ALS representation, this healthcare company is actually stirring things up in Silicon Valley, because it is most true to the phrase patient-centric. It is so authentically so. And it's not just Brian and I, it's truly the expansive team of patients and caregivers who you can see on our website, who are driving forward the decisions we make about what service to offer next. What do patients need most? To your other question, Michelle, we have a scientific advisory board. Also, their names are listed on our website. And these are individuals from the top ALS research institutions who are helping support Eric and his team of teleneurologists in thinking through all sorts of matters, everything from new genetic variants with Brooke and the team to keep an eye on, to off-label therapy discussions, to, frankly, many of these research leaders are also ALS clinicians in their day jobs, and sort of how we can augment and better support the ALS ecosystem to, support them in their clinics and patients that they currently serve. But let me know if there's anything I can sort of draw out further there that's useful.
No, I think that's great. Just you have this multifaceted approach, right? And that's what I think is going to be really powerful. I mentioned on the call that we did before, one of the things that I think is so, I obviously am enamored with your genetic testing, but one of the things I think is so powerful about what you're doing, my mother passed away from a rare disease about 20 years ago, and she was told the same thing that people with ALS have, is there's nothing we can do to help you. But she had a variety of complications, and what her neurologist told her is, you need a captain of the ship. And I love that Synapticure is going to be able to be the captain of the ship. So if you have other comorbidities, they're going to have your medical records, right? So explain how that works. If you're dealing with diabetes and ALS, or if you've got some other heart condition in ALS, how does Synapticure kind of provide basically that wraparound or captain of the ship services?
Yeah, Eric, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, that's just part of medical care, right? We work as a team amongst many different types of caregivers or providers or whatever. The thing is as neurologists, we always consider the neurologic components or issues to be the most important to us. And so we kind of move in that direction, but we work hand in hand with any other caregivers or any other physicians or groups that you work with. That's, we put all that together during your very first care coordination visit, how you want things structured, who you want medical records to go to, all of those types of things. People want us to be in contact with specific physicians and potentially not with others. I did see one, I think that's tangentially related, one other question in the chat about if I get this type of stuff done, will this put me at risk for insurance or things like that? Like I said, we direct medical records where you want them to be directed.
Gotcha.
And let me give one example. So I think I've told this story before. But when I was diagnosed, Sandra used to carry around how many? 7? 7 different binders that contained our medical records, so that we could share them with every clinician. And I know it might seem like a small thing, but having us collect all of your medical records and organizing them for you is a huge benefit, because it allows anyone who you want to see to have the whole package and history right away.
Mike, do you have any other questions? I have one to follow up, but go ahead.
Go right ahead. Nope. I think I've just sent, yeah, go right ahead.
One of the things that I think is really important or powerful that you guys do is several times we've had posted on No More Excuses, and this was a real shock to me, that patients had burning tears, right? And literally probably 100 people said, I have burning tears, and nobody's ever talked about it. And I said, well, have you asked your neurologist? Yeah, they've never heard of it. But clearly we had 100 people on this thread that said, I've got burning tears. And so an example of that, if Synapticure isn't able to address it themselves, you could handle a referral for like a neuro-ophthalmologist that might be able to help, right? Is that something within the, yeah, and that's been ignored. Eric, go ahead.
No, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, referrals for things that would be necessary, we can definitely make. Neuro-ophthalmologists, unfortunately, are rare, and some states don't even have one. But we can at least get you to an ophthalmologist if it's medication related.
Yeah, I've been very excited, Michelle, to hear several Synapticure patients say, not only did Synapticure organize my medical records, make it so that the burden of keeping everything straight is not on me and my spouse, but also when I need to find a new doctor for, an eye appointment or what have you, Synapticure is, able to refer me because we are a physicians group. And so I do want, as we wrap up, to really underscore that when Brian and I started Synapticure, there were a lot of an amazing ecosystem of resources for ALS patients. But what we found that was missing was a medical practice. And a medical practice can do things that Synapticure patients haven't had outside of a traditional brick and mortar clinic before. We can write prescriptions. We can write physician referrals. We can do things that haven't been possible from a nonprofit seat in the past. And so that was the impetus, was there were a whole host of things that a covered entity or a medical group could do for patients that we felt was missing. And so that is very much the case, Michelle.
Yeah, and I think, what I hear over and over again is I'm so frustrated. I have to deal with my own healthcare issues, or I'm caring for somebody. I don't have time to do blank. I don't have time to be on the phone with insurance companies. I don't have time to track down my wheelchair, whatever that is. And every time somebody has said that to me, my response has been, have you called your Synapticure care coordinator? Because that should be your first go-to, so that they can take that off your plate, so that you can focus on you and getting healthy, and you can focus on your care or your caregiving, right? Whichever that is. So let the care coordinators be your partners in this. And if Synapticure can handle it, they'll tell you. And if they can't, they'll help you find other resources that might be able to, right? So that's what I think is a beautiful blessing about what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's so important for us to be making this as cost effective as possible for patients. So everything we do, we're trying to think about how to lower the cost for patients. So the care coordination support is by and large, free of charge. And it's just, how can we support you to get your records organized? Which, by the way, if you sign up for something like, a Picnic Health or a different kind of medical records entity that would organize for you, there's a cost to that. So there's so many things that we're doing that otherwise would not be free of charge, that at Synapticure are free of charge. And then when we talk about these, appointments with physicians who are teleneurologists, we're doing everything we can to make the cost of that as low as possible, to get insurance to cover as much as possible for patients. We have, with Brooke's help, been able to minimize the cost of the genetic testing and counseling. So everything we're doing is about access to everything you need, getting it as fast as possible, as comprehensive as possible, and at as low a cost as possible. So all of those things are really important to us.
One thing to add.
Awesome.
And we have one closing thought. Oh, I have one closing thought. So I'm pumped to be here. I plan to be here. What did you say? Mhm. I plan to be here when ALS turns from terminal to chronic. And I want you people to be here with me. Because if I'm all alone, all the what? Because if I'm all alone, then I'm going to have to drink all the champagne on my own.
I don't think that'll be too much of a concern. I think you'll have plenty of people to help you. I get that feeling. Mo Nunez is so awesome, Michelle, as you know. He just said that about your comment about tears. He said that he and his brother call it jalapeno eye. I thought that was funny. That's Mo, if you know Mo. But no, I just wanted, as we close, I just want to say thank you guys so much. Synapticure's mission is very much in line with that of No More Excuses. I love the way, Sandra, you put it with being aggressive. If something doesn't exist where patients need something, then you create it. You know, we're just not accepting failure at this point is so crucial for ALS. And this company represents a new way to do things where you can get an answer of yes for a change, and kind of more of a one-stop shop there mindset where you can go in, you can receive, once you receive your diagnosis from somebody that's able to do that, you can go in and you can then begin to look at options. ALS is going to take a multidisciplinary approach. It's going to take these upstream and downstream therapies, and genetic ALS, people out there, you've got to get tested, because that is as upstream as it gets. And when you know what you have, then you can also look at those options and then look at downstream options. We have a lot that's right on the precipice, whether it's AMX35, Dr. Appel's Treg procedure that we've talked about so many times, Neurone, copper ATSM, I think I said AMX35, but all of these things, and even the other options, like Sandra again said, we'll look at doing off-label prescriptions. If it can be done, they'll do it. And so I just think the traditional model of going into the clinic and letting them monitor your decline every few months, that's not going to cut it, folks. And when you have something better like this, it's a no-brainer. So go in and get tested, find out what you're working with, and then you can know where to go from there. But I think you guys are right on the target with this company, and I think it's going to do great things. I'm so happy to hear you have almost, what was it, 550 something patients in just over 6 months or close to there. That's incredible. And it's just going to get more and more. It's going to build. So thank you all so much. And Michelle, I'm sure if anybody has any closing comments, please go ahead. But yeah, it's great to do this tonight. And thank you all so much.
We lost Sandra as Brian's. I just want to say thank you guys for sharing this to the big community on No More Excuses, but we'll send a recording to the team at Synapticure so that they can get this out. So if anybody wasn't able to make this, we will have that available for everybody as well. But personally, thank you for being disruptors. Thank you for not being inside the box, not just thinking outside the box, but just destroying the box, which is what you've done. And I know that goes along the way with your phrase of no longer are you going to hear. I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do to help you, right? Yep. And I'll turn it over to Brian for the final words.
I will just say one thing. Let's effing do this.
I was going to say that, but you took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, the one thing that I'll add, Michelle, and maybe you'll follow up with more information in the Facebook group, but I know that there are so many questions that we didn't get to answer tonight, and each represents a reflection of how insanely confusing the system is. And so I hope that folks will go to Synapticure's website and reach out to care coordinators. It's really easy to contact us through that. And every care coordinator will be more than happy to sit down and answer each and every one of the questions that we weren't able to get to.
And what
let's
we'll
end
do,
with that. How do we get it? How do they do that? How do they get in touch with you guys? What's the best way?
Yeah, it's synapticure.com. If you Google it, I'm sure it'll come up. And then I think there's a contact us button, but we'll add additional details, Michelle, if you're able to post in the group afterwards.
Yeah, so we'll put the link there. We've had it several times on No More Excuses already, but we'll put it again with synapticure.com. And they've been, everybody's been amazing. Nothing, literally, I've not heard a single thing that's been anything but massive praise for your care coordinators and what they've been able to do. So they really helped launch this platform to change ALS. And Sandra's back, so we'll let her have the final
Yeah,
word since she
she missed
reappeared.
my soapbox. You can go ahead and finish this off, Sandra.
Yeah, well, I guess I want to say, first of all, what we've said before, which is Brian and I are a patient and a caregiver who saw over the last 5 years everything personally that was wrong with care today, and then hearing from all of our friends in this fight everything that was wrong. And the solution to it was not easy, but it was not impossible. And we knew it had to be done. And so here we are creating the very best version of care for families today. And honestly, we are just beginning. So if you look back at or think back to what Eric shared at the beginning of this call, we are just starting up and there's so much more ahead that we're going to be able to offer. And so signing up now, being a Synapticure patient, having a Synapticure care coordinator, a Synapticure teleneurologist, making sure your testing's up to date is the best way to make sure that you are among the first in line as we add on more and more services that support you better, that help you fight this as long as possible and give you the best shot. And so I just like, if there's any word that underscores Synapticure, it is fighting. We just want to fight for you. We want to fight for ALS families because darn it, I fight real hard for Brian every day. And we really want to bring that to everybody. So,
That's right.
This was a, 1 hour plus call, but please go to synapticure.com. It is very easy to enroll, to get connected and to get started. And there's a lot more to come where we can help. So really, thank you everybody so much for joining. And we are so eager to do more here.
Let's effing do this.
Let's effing do this.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. We're so glad you joined us. And we'll get the list of questions to you, Sandra. If you haven't had a chance to comment on No More Excuses, if there's things that come up, we'll send you the whole
probably
list of
missed some.
questions so that you guys have them for your team.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Dr.
See you,
Anderson,
everybody.
Brooke, wonderful to meet you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.